My name is Stony Tennant. I was out at Sutro from the spring of 1963 until the fall of 1965, so a little over 2 years. I need to go in a little bit of my background. I was raised in a farming ranching community where work ethic and individuality was a big issue with the public, and the mettle of a man was derived from that attitude. I say that to begin the whole story. In 1958, I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I was sent overseas. I spent 4 years overseas, and in 1963, I came back. I was discharged. In those days, there was no contact. I hadn't seen newspapers. I hadn't known what was going on here in California. I was raised in Northern California. And the culture had changed considerably while I was gone for that 4 years and didn't have any contact here. I didn't realize how much it impacted our society and our culture. But after I came back, I wanted to be a vet, so I was going to go back to college. I had been in Vietnam, where I was training South Vietnamese Marines in the highlands north of northern South Vietnam on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and people think about the trail as being a trail. It isn't. It's a 40-mile wide swath of mountains with valleys, deep valleys running north and south that the VC and the NVA were using to supply southern Vietnam, the insurgency there, with arms. Our job was to patrol those mountains and cut off the access from the north. But the people living there, the Montagnards, every 7 years on average was a starvation period for them, and they had stores of rice to hedge against that and have enough to eat and have enough to plant for their next year planting. But the people from the north coming through transporting arms and munitions to the south didn't carry any supplies. They stole it from the people as they came through. Consequently, there was a lot of harassment. The people tried to hide their stores. Particularly the NVA officers would line up the head man and his family outside their hut, and if the head man did not comply with telling them where their stores were, they shot the first child in the head right in front of and then asked him the question again, and with the threat that they would wipe out the whole family. Consequently, there was a lot of violence going on. I saw violence on both sides. I saw executions on the south side after NVA prisoners didn't comply with the questioning. They just executed them. So I had seen things at a very early age that most people didn't see. I came back to California, and my head wasn't into going back to college. The very first thing I did is get into a big hassle with a college instructor who thought he knew about all of the world, and he'd never been out of academia. And I told him he didn't know what he was doing, and he in front of the class had to defend himself, and I walked out afraid I was going to hurt somebody if I didn't. So then I came over here and came to Lake Tahoe and started coming weekends. Friday I would head out, wouldn't even go home, come down here and spend time. And I met Robin Larson, who already had the lease out at Sutro. But he was raised in the city, and he didn't have any experience with repairing things, rebuilding things, or any of that. And he was floundering to a large degree out there, getting buildings repaired and the bar opened. And so, excuse me. So I decided that was a good opportunity to get into something that was a little closer to where I was in my mindset. Isolated out there, hard work. So the very first thing we did is roof the what we called what ended up being the bar. We re-roofed it, built a bar, and got it ready to open. And while I was up at Lake Tahoe for a short period of time, I bought a cabin up there, so I rented it out. So I had some money coming in to support myself. Robin Larson was getting money from Berkeley, where he was raised. I don't really know where it was coming from, but he had money coming in to support his girlfriend and family that was developing as he had children out there. So anyway, we got the bar open finally, and we started making a little bit of money, and we could then support Robin's family, and I stayed out there and worked. Robin Larson, as I said, was a city boy, and he liked dead things. He did not like development and fresh plants and that kind of thing. And so we started becoming at loggerheads because I wanted to improve the area out there and maintain those buildings, and he believed in what he called arrested decay, and there isn't any such thing. You cannot arrest decay. You have to do something about it, and he wasn't willing to do that. So we argued a lot about things. We did some things that he approved of. Outside the portal in those days, where it was all tules out there and cottonwoods, it was a nice little forest of shade and a place to get out for R&R and relax, and I enjoyed it very much. Later on, people ended up destroying that. I was sorry to hear that, but we did divert the water that came out of the tunnel. It was fairly warm as it exited the portal, and we diverted it out to go around the backside of the bar building, and we dug a hole back there and put some redwood lining from a tank in there. We made what now would be called a hot tub, and so we relaxed, and particularly winter nights it was a great place to go sit in the hot tub, and there was no light pollution in those days. Carson City and Reno, you couldn't see the dim light over the tops of the mountains that now you can't see the stars like you could then. But we got the bar going. We hid all of the electrical wiring and everything that we put in there, and the bar itself, what our plan was, we wanted, in those days, there was a lot of Western movies, Western series on television, and Western was a big draw to people. We made the bar so that only thing when you walked in there you saw were kerosene lamps. That was all of the lighting. The only place that we did have a bulb was in the single bathroom that we put in, men and women's bathroom. It was just a water closet. And but we opened the bar there, and there were lots of things different in those days. One of them happened to be that along the Carson River were thousands of deer. The fields were full of deer, and the ranchers did not like them at all because 10 deer, they figured, ate as much as one cow-calf pair. And so it took a lot of their alfalfa away that they intended to feed their cattle with. So they got deprivation permits. And so they would give away the permits to anybody who was willing to come down there and shoot deer. So I would get a permit, and sometimes it would be every week. I would get a deer permit, go down there and shoot a young buck that was good meat, good eating, and small. And I would bring it back to the bar. And in the bar, in the main room of the bar, we had a couple of tables and some old chairs in there, old round tables. But we didn't, if you stood at the bar, you had to stand. There were no stools or anything there. But we had a big stove that was about, if my memory serves me, 4 feet by 4 feet, and then it was on a stand up off the wooden floor. To protect it, we put down sheet metal, and it was about 10 feet long. But we had that stove polished up and slicked down, and that was our frying pan. We built a fire in the stove, and we passed out venison steaks to people, and they would fry their steaks on the stove. And we had couches around the stove for relaxation, and that was the centerpiece of most of the conversation and goings on in the bar were around sitting at those couches. So we had a venison feed on Saturday night or Sunday night, and we gave those away, and people came from all over Carson City. And the crowd we had there were a lot of people from the university would come, the younger set, but we got lots and lots of families and older set because of the type of bar that we had was so unique. And the warehouse where we built the bar in, on the west wall had cubby holes about a foot by foot or 10 by 10 and foot deep. And there were these cubby holes from floor to probably 10 feet above the floor. And we filled all of those cubby holes behind the bar with all of the things we found around Sutro as we were collecting stuff up, whatever it happened to be. We had a mummified cat, we had old bottles, we had artifacts of all sorts, and old scissors and Chinese artifacts. We had lots of stuff behind the bar so that the people could just spend their time while they were there checking stuff out if they wanted to. And we had plenty of stuff back there. People would always see something new as they came. So the plan was we wanted to open the bar first, and then ultimately we wanted to open a restaurant in the mill building. And Robin ultimately decided he didn't want to do that. I had ambitions that he didn't have, and he just wanted to live out there, and I was ending up tending bar. I'd work on the place all day, and then I'd tend bar, and we didn't close until everybody left, whatever hour that was. And once in a while, Robin would bring me a meal. I mostly ate venison steak and lived on venison steak and beer, which wasn't a great menu. So anyway, I got to the point by 1965, Robin would never tending bar, and I was always tending bar, and I had ambitions that were not in line with Robin's. He had the lease, and so I ended up leaving for that reason. And I went east, started working on the ranches, and as I said, Robin was not much for work He liked to sit around over there at the house and read. And so he was looking for somebody to lease the bar. He didn't even reopen it after I left for a while. And Robin Hancock, a guy who we knew from the Bay Area who came up a lot, did some bartending out there for him, but ultimately he found a guy by the name of John Schumacher who, excuse me, who did take a lease on it. And so Robin would have some money coming in from him. And Schumacher was what we referred to as the hippies. And this is why we, from then on, the townspeople always called it the hippies out there, because when Schumacher came in, Woodstock had been part of the hippie thing, and they wanted to relive that era of free love, drugs, rock and roll, and it was an entirely different culture and lifestyle that moved in out there from the townspeople. All of Dayton at that time it was an agricultural town. The mining had pretty much shut down. There were some leaser miners who were leasing land up at Como and Silver City and around, and so they had their residence in Dayton, where they spent their off time when they weren't out at the mines. And so there were some miners around, and there were people who had grown up in the 1880s here, still in town, and so I enjoyed very much talking about the old days with them, and they told me about Dayton, a lot of the history, and I really got into the history of Dayton. Then after I left Sutro, while I was there, I didn't know much about the history here. And so anyway, when Schumacher and that group came, they had police calls out there, which we had never had any trouble. More people moved in, and they were all from the Bay Area in California. And the police warned them about the drugs and the culture that was developing out there, but they kept at it, and ultimately Robin lost his liquor license because they raided out there for drug raids a number of times, and the police just finally said, that's it, we're not doing it anymore, and they shut him down. Okay, yeah, I'm standing there in the photo with my arms out like that because everybody's giving me such a hard time over these pants I'm wearing. Well, the story of the pants was, I bought those things when I was working for $1.25 an hour up at Lake Tahoe, digging holes for foundations of signs, and went to work for $1.25 an hour. And then because I dug the holes so fast, they gave me a raise to $2.50 an hour. And I thought, man, I got to work hard now. They're paying me $2.50 an hour. But these pants were heavy canvas work pants that I paid something like $12 for. Well, that was a lot of hours worth of my time for those pants. I didn't realize they were shrink to fit. I bought them to fit, and these things shrunk, and they're about that high, and my shirt isn't tucked in because I couldn't button a top button, but I was bound and determined. I paid good money for these things, and I'm going to wear them out. But they lasted forever. I never did wear them out. But anyway, that's the story on that one photo. Laura has another photo. I'm out on the west side of the bar building, and so Pam said she could not find a picture of that west side of the building at all. So I'm standing out in the parking lot on the west side, and in the background is the west side of that building. I can't find that picture anyplace. Laura got into photography years ago. We have thousands and thousands of pictures, and someplace it's in there. I will find it and get it to you. My mother had another photograph of us there, which Laura said she could find. She found two of them that my mother took that same day or other days. But anyway, I maybe have 5 photographs of that entire time, because that was an era where we didn't carry a camera. I mean, if you were out here cowboying and you carried a camera, everybody makes such fun of you that you wouldn't ever do it again. So there aren't many pictures of ranch work and outside that kind of thing around here, because it was just not like everybody has a cell phone today. It's way different.
You were starting to talk about the transition from the, not transition, but the transition from the drug hippies to the art hippies.
Yeah. So the drug hippie thing lasted for maybe a year and a half, perhaps a little longer. And then they lost their liquor license, and then they moved in a couple of buildings, and the more artist colony started. And I think that was the time Pierce was out there, is when the artist colony was going on. I know he was here in the area. I met him back before Laura and I were married in '68. I met him before that, but he was up at Silver City, and but I never did know him out at Sutro. As I say, I didn't really know any of those people out there who were in the artist colony until later, when Laura was the editor of the newspaper, and then she was documenting things that they were doing out there that were community project or community connected. That she wrote articles on, and so she introduced me to some of those people out there. But as I say, that was just in the artist area, and I later on knew some people who lived out there, and they weren't hippies. They just liked the solitude, and they liked living out there. So. But we still referred to them as the hippies. So that annoys some people. I don't know if they consider it to be a derogatory remark. Ultimately, it wasn't derogatory in our minds. It was just used to differentiate between their culture and our culture, was just so different. And we didn't have much contact with them because of that cultural difference. So for years and years, until Sutro opened up again, they shut it down, only allowing people who lived there to come. And so I didn't go out there for a long time. I was very disappointed with the potential that those buildings had out there, and we heated strictly. The bar didn't have any heat. It didn't have any light bulbs or anything that was exposed, so we heated totally the bar with this big stove that we had during the winter. I lived in the loft upstairs. There was no heat, no running water, no anything upstairs, no even lights. I had to carry a kerosene lamp getting to and from bed. And it was such a unique place. And the buildings, there were a number of buildings. The stable was still standing. There were a number of buildings that are now gone, and when what we call the hippie generation, I'm sure, or the hippie era, I'm sure into the artist era too, a lot of those buildings disappeared because they used barn lumber to make whatever they were making, buildings, renovating, building sheds for storage, that kind of thing. So it changed a lot up there. A number of those buildings were torn down and rebuilt as something else after I left. But
speaking of the buildings, were you there when any of the structures that are currently on the site were moved to Sutro? I think the Victorian was moved there after your time there.
Yeah, that was after.
What about the little red house? We're trying to figure out some more history on that. Was that there when you were at the site?
You know, I don't know. I don't remember. There were quite a number of buildings around there that are no longer there, and I don't remember that particular building. But the grounds were so different. You know, as I said, there were cottonwood trees there. There were buildings standing in a different portion of decay, collapsing, and that building I can't remember in my mind at all.
Do you remember the fire at the stamp mill? Were you living there at that time?
I was here. Laura and I was married to Laura at that time, so it was after spring of '68. But yeah, I was here. I saw the fire from this side of the river out. And but another thing that comes to mind was about how different the culture was here when I first moved here. Town was all a bunch of Italian, mostly Italian people living here in Dayton. And you had to learn a lot of Italian just communicating with them because they spoke Italian all the time. And down where Jay's Bistro is now was an entrance to the backyard where the restaurant, the back end of the restaurant, the north end of the restaurant, that was Wheels' garage back there. And there was a big old tree out by where the parking lot behind Jay's Bistro, they have that few parking paved there. And back behind that, right next to the main street there, was a big tree, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, these old Italians had come there, and they were speaking Italian all with one another, and they're very animated, you know. They're waving their arms and talking loudly and laughing and having a good time. And these old guys would sit there and talk for an hour or an hour and a half every single day. They'd come, and then they'd wander off, and next afternoon they came back. And the town was a very close-knit. All these guys grew up here in Dayton, and they were in their 80s and 90s at that time. And so there was a lot of camaraderie. But Chester Barton was the deputy sheriff here, and he came to me and he said, "I know you've been working underground in the mining, and you do a lot of blasting." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, where you leave town and you go past our park where the old highway goes River Street, where River Street hits the existing highway now, you don't go very far, a few hundred yards toward Carson City, and if you look at the side of the mountain below the old Chinese ditch, you'll see an outcrop of this, we call it pudding stone. It was just sedimentary rock and stuff. It's soft, but it has a crack in the middle of it. And Mike Perdere, I don't mean young Mike now, Camille was Mike's father, and then Michelle Perdere, Mike, who's my age, his grandfather cleared the Perdere Ranch down there, and they used dynamite to blast these stumps out. These old cottonwood trees, some of them were 5 feet in diameter, huge stumps. And they would tunnel underneath it, put some dynamite in there, blow the stump and break the roots loose, and then they could, with a team of horses, they could pull that stump over. So they used that was their powder magazine. If you go out there and dig in that thing, if you dig down far enough, you'll find out that that's tunneled back in underneath. Well, it had wooden doors on it that were locked to protect the dynamite or keep people out of there. And so somebody had wondered what was in there all these years, and they had cut the lock and gone in there. And this old dynamite, there were 3 boxes of dynamite, big wooden boxes like this, of dynamite in there with separate sticks, but it was all crystallized. The nitroglycerin had come out, and there were yellow crystals all over, and it had soaked the boxes, and it was really, really touchy stuff. So Chester came to me and he said, "Can you get rid of that?" Well, if I had any sense, I would have said yes, and I would have gone in there, built a little fire and next to it and let it burn, because nitroglycerin won't explode. You have to have some kind of shock. So I decided that I was out at Sutro at the time. So I decided, I went in there, I got an old mattress, I put it in the back of my pickup. I brought these boxes out real carefully. I put them in the back of my pickup, and I drove out to the flat below Sutro, but there was nothing out there in those days. And so I got maybe 1,000 feet off of the highway, and I stacked these boxes up, and I backed off, and about 75 yards, and I should have gone 300 yards. I took my 30-30 and I put a round into that thing, and I blew a crater that was as big as this room and 3 feet deep, and this big cloud of dust went up, and immediately Chester, I hear his siren going. He came out there and "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Oh, I was just getting rid of that dynamite." And he said, "You about broke every window in Dayton." And so, yeah, I didn't make many points over that with Chester, but it was an experience that I remember the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I had a big old dog when I was out there in Sutro. It was a 3/4 wolf and a 1/4 German Shepherd, but it looked just like a wolf. I mean, huge feet and big dog. And there were so many jackrabbits on the flat down there. I'd go out every other day or so and just shoot a jackrabbit and feed it to my dog. I never bought dog food or anything. And so I look at the housetops now, how much it's changed from in the days when we would sit out on the deck and we could see over the top of the tailings, and we could see the highway out there. Highway 50 in those days, if there was a car on the roadway and we saw some headlights coming from Dayton, it was a 50-50 chance that it was somebody coming to Sutro. I mean, there were so few cars on the road in those days that that was the percentages we figured. Here comes some business. And so it was the isolation we felt out there. You don't feel it anymore. You know, it's so built up around it. And the old town, of course, was the only thing, and there were no ranches or anything out on that side of the river, down a river road, but not up where the state park is now. And
so tell me a bit about like what the bar was like in your era. Like, well, a typical night. I are we talking like there's a couple of folks hanging out at the bar, or there's a whole crowd, or I mean, I'm sure you had the whole variety.
Yeah. People would come out in groups. Sometimes we would have 40 people there, but very seldom. Raymondero was Raymondero was the old Indian who lived across over where the vet is on the other side of the river bridge here, where his place, that was the Indian colony over there. If you look just behind the vets off to the side a little bit, but along the river you'll see some tamarisk trees there. That was where the Indian colony was. Raymondero lived there, and like I was saying, everybody had a nickname. He was Raymond the Irrigator because that's how he made his living. Was he braided rawhide and sold that, and he worked as an irrigator during the summer on these ranches. But Raymond, like so many Indians, had a real drinking problem, and he would come out there to the bar and he would drink, and I would think he was so drunk he was going to pass out any time, but he would just keep drinking and drinking, and he could really put away the liquor. But he had lost his driver's license because he'd gotten busted too many times for drunk driving. And so he rode his horse from there he rode his horse to work, and he'd ride it out there to Sutro, and he came quite often, and he may be the only guy there. And I'd sit around and serve drinks to him until it was so late that he finally did pass out and we would drag him out to his horse, put him on the horse, lay him over his saddle horn. I don't know how he stood it. Slap the horse on the butt, and the horse knew its way home. And so another couple of days, and Raymond would be back out there, and that was the every single time. He drank until we put him on his horse and headed him home.
Was there any interest at all in the historical aspect of the site at that point? I mean, other than just like casually as a backdrop for the bar, were there people out there who were interested in the 1800s history at all?
Oh yeah. I learned. I had to read the book on Sutro, and because lots of people had heard of. We had a lot of people coming from the Bay Area, came up, and of course Sutro Baz was down there. Sutro started. He was mayor of Sutro, and he started Golden Gate Park, and all of these connections that people knew about Sutro. They didn't know much about the town. Some people would come out there and want to dig bottles. Other people were interested in the history. Other people were just really enthralled with the unique bar that we had, and they would bring their friends when they came to visit. Oh, you got to go out and see the Sutro bar. So we would have, on a typical night during the week, we would have maybe 2 to 10 people come. On weekends, we always had a bigger crowd. We would have people from the Bay Area who would come and camp there, particularly a motorcycle group, Hell's Angels, as a matter of fact. Guys would come out there and camp for the weekend. So we had a very broad-based clientele. As I said, we had the motorcycle guys, we had history buffs, we had people who just liked the ambiance, we had people who they brought their parents and grandparents when they came to visit. Oh, you got to go to Sutro. So we had a big draw. We had so much potential for the place, and I guess I was responsible for the breakup of the thing, but I just couldn't take it any longer. I burned out. So yeah, it changed so much in a short period of time from what we envisioned. And then when the mill burned down, by that time, they had stripped out a lot of the interior of the mill during the Second War. They were scrapping everything, and so they had stripped out a lot of the mill, so it was basically open building. And Robin decided that people couldn't see us up there because we didn't have any lights or anything that shone out you could see from the highway. So people would get lost. The road getting up there was not even graveled, it was just a dirt road. And so you had to know pretty much during the day where you turned off, because if you came at night, it was really hard to find. So Robin decided he needed to put a light out in the mill building so that people could see that spot of light, and they just would drive toward that light. And he got old knob and tube wiring that was laying around up there and in some of those buildings, and he stripped it out and laid a line out to the mill and hung a light bulb out there, and it just burned 24 hours a day, but you could see at night where it was. And I'm sure that's what burned that building, was that old insulation, that cloth insulation on those wires. Gets wet, he just put it on the ground, gets wet and rots and arcs and starts a fire. So,
what
yeah.
about entertainment, any special events and everything, anything like that? I mean, I know that in Pierce's era, they had the movies that they would show at the bar. And then, what year was that album recorded in?
Rocky Adamson.
Yeah.
1967, right?
We never did have anything like that, but we were the ones. Laura, as a matter of fact, was heavily involved with that. But we started the movies, and they were all foreign films, and that was kind of for the UNR crowd, and it was kind of getting into the hippie era, and so the influence in the schools was greater than any place else at that time. The hippie influence was greater in the schools, so the kids that were going to UNR, I say kids, I was a kid, going to UNR were kind of into this foreign film stuff. I don't know the word, into this different kind of trendy entertainment. And so Laura's ex-husband, Charlie Brandenburg, Brandingham, not Brandenburg, Charlie Brandingham, who was going to plant potatoes in the pond up there and diverted the water. He and Laura, at the request of Robin, started showing movies up there, up above the bar, and they would project that on the wall and show those films. And at first it was free, but it cost us to rent those things, and we had expenses that we had to start charging. We didn't charge much, $1 or something like that for foreign films. And so there would be 10 to 20 people come see a film. I think they showed a different film every week up there. But then Laura was stuck with it. Charlie wasn't much into that kind of thing either. He didn't like those people from academia who came out there. He was a rancher guy, and he just didn't fit with him much, so he didn't like dealing with that, so Laura ended up with it. I didn't know that they continued that for very long, but Pierce must have been out there not too long after I left, I guess.
Yeah, I think he started in '67, if I remember correctly.
Oh.
But
Oh yeah, well that was quite a while after I left.
he told me that he got the movies from well, David Toll had the Sparks cinema, I guess, and it wasn't doing so well in Sparks, so they brought it out here. So I don't know if it was like restarting what you guys had started or what the,
Oh, could have been.
yeah,
Uh,
no idea on that. But
Yeah, I don't either. I don't know where Laura would remember where they got those films, but I thought they ordered them from the Bay Area someplace.
Well, I saw a schedule from back in Pierce's era anyway, and they were showing like, you know, Japanese samurai films and yeah, just some unusual stuff. Films that I like, but you know, long black and white subtitles like
Yeah.
definitely you got to be in
Yeah.
the mood for it. So
Yeah,
it's interesting kind of trying to picture how the bar crowd and that went.
yeah. Yeah, the people who came for the movies were not the bar crowd. They were a different group. And I don't remember anybody but just out of being polite. When they first arrived, they would buy a beer or something and go up and watch the movies and then leave. They never stuck around the bar. So it was definitely kind of a
Yeah,
different group.
thing.
Yeah.